Even my story now is somewhat so unbelievable that I don't even share it with certain people, because you wouldn't believe it if I told you that I made this Hollywood movie.
Bill, when did you start writing Chasing 3000?
Well, that's a good question, because when did I really start writing? I was an attorney by education and profession. My mother died after a short illness of a brain tumor. She was 60 years old. And I was half her age. And I thought, what if half of my life is over? What did I really want to do? I wanted to write, but I had never expressed it to anyone. And so I had a friend who worked at Disney, Rick Haskins. And so I visited Rick, and he took me to see some producers. One of the producers was Barry Bernardi. Has a lot of credits. Interesting guy. I think his wife is from Cincinnati. And so he said, well, Bill, there's two ways to get into the business. Start as a gopher and work your way up. I thought, well, I have a pregnant wife and two daughters. I hope, option B is better than that. And he said, you have something that we want, and we will pay you for it. So I spent the rest of the day driving around LA saying, what did I have that no one else had? And I had this really interesting relationship with my brother growing up. And I said, what if I wrote a story about my brother and me? And I had never written a screenplay. At the time, I bought books about how to write a screenplay. And I wrote a very autobiographical story. I think it was called The First Step. And it was very autobiographical. And fairly crudely written. It wasn't terribly good, but it got some attention, and a producer almost purchased it for, if you remember at the time, after school specials. And so it gave me the encouragement to keep writing. So I kept writing. I wrote a number of other screenplays. And I went back. Then what I did is, after I wrote about 2 or 3 more screenplays, I got a little better at my craft. I went back to my original story and added the hook about the boys going to see Roberto Clemente get his 3,000th hit. And so I wrote Chasing 3000. Probably my first draft was like 1999. And I pitched it and tried to get it made. And I had another friend who worked at Warner Brothers. So I met with one of the executives, and he liked this story, but he had some criticism of it. He said, well, there's no girl in this story. I said, well, my mother. He didn't laugh. I said, that's a joke. That's a joke. And so I met a young actor, writer named Chris D'Annunzio. And Chris said, I really like your screenplay, Bill, but I think it needs to be bigger. The feedback I was getting is that the story was too small. And I learned at the time as a writer that meant it was maybe too intimate. It didn't have broad enough appeal, that I needed to make the story bigger. And so Chris and I, we locked ourselves in a room over 4th of July weekend on a Warner Brothers lot, and we rewrote Chasing 3000 with a trip, with the trip being bigger, a 3-day trip where the boys go to see Clemente, and the trip is across the country. And so I fictionalized the story a little bit more. One of the things for people who are writing, and maybe writing for the first time, an autobiographical story, one of the problems with that is that you tend to want to stick to the story too much, as opposed to taking enough creative license to tell the story in a dramatic way. People will often ask me, well, what was your real trip like? And I'll say, if I wanted to tell you that, I would have made a documentary. this, this story is really a dramatic telling of my relationship with my brother Steve. And to be honest with you, some of the things that happened didn't happen on that 3-day trip, but it happened during our life. So it's really our life condensed into this 3-day trip dramatically. And so that's where the finished product, or the finished draft of the Chasing 3000 you see on the screen came from, was this writing session with my then writing partner, Kristen Nunzio, who helped me craft a story that would have broader appeal.
Were you practicing entertainment law at the time?
Well, yeah, I was a practicing attorney, and so I would write on weekends or evenings. I would try to steal time. I tried not to steal time away from my family, but I would just write when I had a chance. And so sometimes my wife and daughters would go to the swimming pool, and I would stay home and I would write. That's if you want to write and you want to be a filmmaker, you have to make sacrifices. If you want to be good in anything, you have to make sacrifices. And so, yeah, I was, working full time. I didn't quit my day job. I just had a better day job than most writers.
Well, sure, but a lot of pressure and
Yes.
Probably, I would assume, maybe demanding clients, or maybe not. But what I'm curious about is, were people at the firm aware that you were doing this Hollywood thing, this wild, crazy thing?
No one's ever asked me that. That's a really good question. Not until I got the money for it, and it was going to be a film. Oh, I had a few close friends that knew I was writing. At that time, I didn't share it because people would think I was crazy.
Sure.
What are you
Conservative firm, whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But just
Right.
I'm living in Cincinnati, and I'm writing a screenplay, right? And people thought, what? That's so I didn't share it with a lot of people, but I shared it with family members and friends, but not until we were at the place where we were going to get this movie shot. That did really, because I took a lot of time off of work at that time.
And so the cat was out of the bag at
Correct.
that point, right?
Correct.
Right. It reminds me of the John DeLorean doc, where his people at the plant found out that he was going to Hollywood, and they some people couldn't handle that. It was kind of rubbed them the wrong way. So I just wondered how sort of this Midwestern life, and then you go to do something so totally different.
Right.
There could be pushback or jealousy, whatever. So yeah. It's interesting.
And even my story now is somewhat so unbelievable that I don't even share it with certain people, because you wouldn't believe it if I told you that I made this Hollywood movie. People, did you shoot in your backyard? No, I made a.
But you did shoot some of it. Sorry to interrupt. In Ohio, is that right?
No, actually in Pittsburgh.
Oh, in Pittsburgh. I'm
so
sorry.
we shot
Okay.
4 days in Pittsburgh and then 24 days in LA, just doubling for locations across the country.
Okay, fascinating. Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was
No,
Ohio
but that's
or
it was
Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Yeah, because we grew up near Pittsburgh, so that's the story of the brothers. We grew up in a small steel mill town called Steubenville, Ohio,
Oh, I see. Okay.
home of Dean Martin
Oh, very nice.
and Jimmy the Greek.
Oh, very nice.
But,
Okay.
and-
But now it's out of the now you're sort of a town.
Correct.
Local boy makes good. Now that you're a celebrity there because you've gone and done sort of this impossible thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm not sure I'm a celebrity, but I don't get any.
I don't know.
I don't get any tables at the nice restaurants.
Oh, darn. All right.
Thanks for rating that up.
Well, then maybe after this interview that'll happen. But had you ever written a screenplay before, Chasing 3000?
No, just my original draft. Just the yes, I had written that original story, that the first step, and then I wrote 2 or 3 additional screenplays before I went back to write Chasing 3000.
And this goes back, you claim you've worked on this film or had worked on it how many years before it actually came to fruition?
I probably, I mean, to become a writer, I mean, I was for 15 years, and I would fly out, and I would take meetings, and I make contacts, and it was interesting. I had people would tell me, I had a producer tell me in real time, "You can't do what you're doing." And I said, "I'm sitting in your office in Beverly Hills, pitching you my stories. I am doing it." But
And what was his response?
nothing. He was kind of flabbergasted. But the whole idea that I didn't live in Cincinnati, I didn't live in LA at the time. And one of my first screenplays, because I had my contact at Disney, got it to a development person, and I got coverage back. In the coverage, the person wrote, "This isn't a bad story, but this guy is from Cincinnati. What does he know? If he was really serious, he would be here." I thought, but I am serious. But that was, you would hear that, you would read that in books, you would hear that in seminars. If you're serious, you're going to come out here to LA. But I am serious. So I had to overcome that. And so what I did was my cousin Matt lives in LA, and so I used his address, and I got an LA cell phone. Hey.
It was before burner phones.
Yeah, exactly. I live here in LA,
Yeah.
and so there were people who thought I lived in LA full time. I'd say I out-illusioned the illusionists.
Sure.
But that was, you have to, it's one of the things I tell younger people who, whatever, sometimes you just have to overcome people's objections. I had to get around that because I was serious, but I couldn't move there at that moment. So how do I create the impression? So I got an LA address and an LA cell phone.
So how does an attorney with 4 children living in the Midwest have time to write a screenplay?
I just made time. I just found time, whether it was evenings or weekends. And I would take a notepad with me, and I would, if wherever I was, if I had a night, wherever I stopped writing in my scene the night before, I would take a pad with me, and sometimes I would scribble a note so that that evening I would go back and, revise it. But I was very serious about what I did. I took seminars. I took Robert McKee's seminar and a number of others, and I just think I got better at my craft. And what happened was I wrote a helicopter action picture called Downward Rush, and it was pretty good. I almost sold it, but I got bumped up, I say, into a new stratosphere of writers, because I started to meet with people and producers who were bigger names. And one of those companies was Mandalay. And the young development person, they passed on it, and he said, what else do you have? And I said, "Oh, I have this smaller baseball picture, but you wouldn't be interested in that." And he said, "What? You don't think we're interested in baseball? Is that what you're saying? That we don't like baseball?" He said, "Send it to us." So I sent it to him, and he really loved it. But it was not right for Mandalay. But when he went out on his own, he kept the screenplay. And his name was Ryan Johnson. And Ryan and I became friends. I mean, that's who I went to when I was able to raise even a small amount of money. At that time, I only had raised maybe about $200,000. And Ryan's office was in Venice Beach, and I went to his office one day and I said, "Hey, what if I told you I had Chasing 3000 and $200,000? What would you say?" And he said, "I would say that we can make that movie." "Really?" "Yeah." And so from that point on, then that's when it took off. But Ryan, again, it's about, like a lot of things in life, it's just about making contacts and friends. And so this, who was a development person, he went out on his own as a producer. He took my screenplay with him.
And sorry, how long had you known him? Like, how long had the relationship span before he went out on his own?
Let's see, he went out, it was probably the 1998. And then he went out on his own probably around 2001, 2002.
Okay, so sort of a 4 year.
And then then we started shooting the movie in 2007, I believe. So.
And so at that time, 2007 prices, $200,000 would have covered a 21-day production.
It's funny. We laugh about it now because I didn't have the 200,000. I asked him in attorney weasel language, "What if I told you I had 200,000?"
Okay.
Okay, and so I didn't have the 200,000, and he couldn't make it for 200,000. So it's funny, we were both lying to each other. But what happened is it opened the door to sort of digress a little bit. No one had ever told me they didn't like the film. It was once in a while somebody would say it's a period piece. Those are a little hard to make, but I got frustrated. By that time, I started to get frustrated with my lack of success, and so I said, one day I woke up one morning, I just said to my wife, "I know people with money. I'm just going to raise the money myself." And so I went out and I started talking to friends who were, hedge fund managers and money people, and I just told them. And some people were interested, some weren't, but one friend was interested in it, and with that, and then he read Chasing 3000 and he really liked it. And, he said some of our investors have an appetite for this kind of investment. And so what happened is then we were able to raise $700,000. Then it was for real. And it was going to be a right to video at the time, a small movie, right to video. And, but then Ryan lived in Marina Del Rey near a manager, and one of the people she managed was Ray Liotta. So Ryan got the script to his manager friend, who got it to Ray Liotta. And then we were 4 days away from shooting in Pittsburgh, and we still didn't have the lead cast.
Oh, wow.
And Ray Liotta committed to the movie.
Wow.
And with our budget and with what it was going to cost to hire him, our $700,000 was going to go fairly quickly. But with Ray Liotta coming on board, we were able to raise another $1.2 million. So we raised $1.9 million to shoot the movie.
Did you go back to some of the same people?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
and you let them know, hey,
yes.
folks, we have Ray Liotta attached?
Yes, and they were willing to commit more money to it.
What does that mean, they have an appetite for this kind of investment? Well, what does that mean exactly?
That just means, some investors are willing to take chances.
Okay.
Some people who invest money like to take a chance on something. Some people want to invest in a Hollywood movie.
Sure.
Quite frankly. And others like, I'm willing to take a shot at this. And so that's where that comes from. And so there were enough people that we were able to raise the money.
Sure, and for some people, I don't know how much each person put in, but it might not be as big a chunk as people in LA working survival jobs trying to be in a movie.
Correct.
I get it. Were they able to come to set? Sorry, were they able to come to set?
Some of them, yeah. Oh, yeah. We invited anyone who was able to. When we shot in Pittsburgh, we had a number of investors, and some of them were extras.
Oh, okay. And you have a part in a movie too? I saw.
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
I don't want to give it away. It's on Tubi for people who want to see it. And I love the film. I'm not actually a baseball fan, and I love the film because it's a very special story of these two brothers. So I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you.
And I won't give away some of it, but I enjoy some of the struggle that the older brother goes through. And so I do recommend it. When you said you wanted to make it a bigger film, it wasn't big enough. Can you tell me exactly what was done to make it bigger?
Sure, that's a good question. I mean, and I see this sometimes in like there are a lot of movies, and I call them film festival movies. There are a lot of film festival movies that are really good movies, but their appeal is not broad enough to get distribution and to appeal to enough people. As a movie buff or as a movie producer, filmmaker, as a screenwriter, we might really like this story that we're watching, but now that I've crossed that line into becoming a filmmaker, raising the money, realizing where the money goes, how you shoot a movie, how much a certain shot costs. There are a lot of movies that I've been to a film festival or two or three after that, and I'll say, this is a really good story, but no one's going to go see this in America, right? In where, to get a broader audience. So the story was, so we made the trip bigger. So in other words, that it was maybe too intimate of a story. That's also part of the lack of appeal, the general appeal to certain films. But to make it bigger, we made the trip bigger.
Oh, the road trip.
The road trip. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in real life, we didn't take a trip across the country, but the boys do, and we set it in L.A. so that I learned, that people in L.A. are somewhat myopic. They really love stories about LA, and they might not be able to relate to something. Oh, they're able to relate to it a little bit better. Let's say that if it's in. So that's why we got the boys back in LA to go back to Pittsburgh. But so we had to create a bigger story. We had to get a girl in the story. That's the girl, on the train.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Lovely Tanya Ramone.
Yeah, she's excellent.
Yeah, she's beautiful. And the way I wrote it, she's not supposed to be that pretty.
But you can still see it in her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I came to the set when I saw her, I said, can't you make her? I said to the makeup people, can't you do something? Make her less attractive? But, and so there's certain elements of the story that just got bigger. And so I think with the Clemente hook,
right, as the driving
force, that's where it made the story special. Otherwise, it might just be a story about two brothers. It might just be a film festival movie about two brothers. Oh, this is a really nice picture, but who's going to go see it? Or what can we do with it? And I've learned, I've negotiated, 2 distribution deals. I know what distributors are looking for, and so I try to see even stories when someone will send me a screenplay, and you have to write a story if you really want to write and you want to be a screenwriter. You do have to write something that people are going to want to see and that you can get distribution for.
Well, you have such great characters. I don't want to give stuff away, but that they come up against, and they're very interesting. And I must say, the music choices too were amazing.
Oh. A lot of those they stayed the same as I wrote them in.
Okay, yeah, you got some amazing songs in there. I was surprised that, a lot of times a smaller budget film to get those big level songs, and
Right.
Allman Brothers and things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, hats off to you, and it lent to the time and their trip. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
In fact,
it's a special movie.
all the experiences that I had besides just writing the screenplay, and it morphed into me becoming a producer, of course, on the film. But we wanted to. Interesting story is that we wanted to use this song. Mama Told Me Not to Come.
Okay.
So we reached out to the record label, and they said that the rights were still owned by the writer, R. Newman. So I reached out to Randy Newman, and I told him we want to use this song in our movie, and he said send me a screener. I didn't think I'd ever hear back from him. I told my wife I'm never going to hear back from him. A week later, he contacted me, and he said, "Sure, you can use my song."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's one of the coolest moments of my life.
Wow. That's a great song, by the way, too.
Yeah.
And did he do I Love LA?
Yes.
Okay, wow. So Mama Told Me Not to Come.
Yeah.
And then I Love LA. That's great.
The Three Dog Night sang it.
Yeah.
But he wrote, he's written quite a few songs that others have performed. But yeah, it was a great experience. Yeah, one of those fun things.
Right. And I guess it helped maybe save on attorney costs that you knew enough to do contract negotiations.
Yeah, and just
these things?
sure, we were able to. I was able to. Yeah, to negotiate certain things.
Yeah. No, the music really was a nice backdrop to this trip and that time. And I'll just leave it at that. But great songs, great choices.
Feel for the time of 1972. Yeah.
What do you remember about those early days attempting to write the screenplay for Chasing 3000? I realized it had a different name.
Just how painfully lonely it was to write in my basement, and how removed I was from Hollywood, and how difficult it was for me to get people to read what I was doing. And that's I enjoyed writing. I really I like to write, and I do like. I'm kind of I don't know, because the film doesn't maybe really hit on that, but I was a little bit of a loner growing up, and with a brother who's disabled, and many times he's sick, and your parents are at the hospital. You learn just to fend for yourself, and you also learn. You're with yourself, so you learn to. You're kind of in your own head, and I think what I didn't realize. I think it was Robert McKee who articulated it, that most writers, what we have in common is that we get fractured in our life, and we start to see things two ways. There's something that happens in our life that we get somehow fractured. And so even as a kid, I would see things like something that would maybe be very painful. I would be experiencing the pain, and then I would be saying to myself, oh, this is kind of interesting, this pain and, the faces of my parents. And so what I didn't realize is that all writers have that as part of who they are. And so I don't know where I'm going with this, except
I love it.
Other than
That's great.
That, I will say this in reverse. Getting the movie made was very stressful. Making an independent movie is very stressful, and the stumbling blocks, the roadblocks, the money problems that come. And sometimes I would get off of a phone call, and I'd seek out my wife, and I would just say, this is the trouble that I'm dealing with today. And she would listen to me, and then she would say, well, what would you rather do? What would you rather have? Would you rather be writing downstairs and have no one read your scripts, or would you rather be dealing with this? And I said, I'd rather be dealing with this. Okay, then deal with it. Sure. And life, that's an interesting perspective. It would bring me back to reality of that. It's almost a blessing to be dealing with this incredible, stress. Trying to get the bridge money. Because every independent movie falls short, and you have to get the bridge money. And we had to get the bridge money in order to finish the film. And then you have, you have to deliver the movie. You have an unbelievable list of things that you have to deliver to the distributor, and the insurance and the rights and the contracts. It can be overwhelming, but it's not easy. I've said before, I like that line from it's a song by AC/DC. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. There's a line that says, "I tell you folks, it's harder than it looks."
Sure, sure.
And filmmaking is a lot harder than it looks.
Right, yeah, those are great lyrics.
Right?
Would you say the bar exam? Not everybody passes the bar.
No, bar exam's tough. There are a lot of things tough in life, but what's interesting is that everything I've ever did in my life prepared me then for my film. I sold for a living. I sold 4 years in radio, and so I learned to pitch. You have to be a salesman, right? I mean, a lot of writers struggle with that. A lot of writers struggle with, they're very good writers, but they're not very good at pitching. In fact, it's very common. I was able to, I think I'm pretty good at pitching my story, but I learned as a salesman, right, how to sell. You have to sell your screenplay. As an attorney, right, you learn to negotiate, and then as a writer, you is the creative side. But all of those 3 components in my life helped me get the movie made.
Now, you said something earlier about the loneliness of being in your basement writing. Is it almost like a bittersweet thing, though? Because this is a story that is very important to you.
Yeah.
So you're there, but you said you're used to being alone. Is there something that's almost like this is medicine to be down there doing that?
Yeah, there's a little. The writing can be cathartic, and there is some element about that, but the more you do it, and then the more rejection you get, it becomes painful for writers, right? It's a very painful experience that all writers have of writing, and it's almost like your child, right? You love this thing that you've created, and that others don't see it that way, and so, yeah, writing can be lonely, right? I mean, I enjoyed it more when I learned writing with a partner was really refreshing when we rewrote Chasing 3000, but. I think being disconnected from Hollywood that far away was the most painful part. Because
if you live here, it might be more painful to be here at times, but yeah.
No, it is. I mean, I understand. I have friends that will tell me that, and I have a friend where I came in and I had like 3 meetings, and I said it's pretty good contacts for a guy who lives in Cincinnati, and he goes, those are good contacts for somebody who lives in LA.
Sure.
And so I was, I was lucky to develop good contacts. I had a writing consultant named Doni Nelson. Doni, she worked in the industry for years, and she became a writing consultant. And I forget how I met her, but for years she was my writing consultant, and she also was able to get me contacts of people. And so she wasn't an agent, so to speak, but she helped me, especially for someone who was out, and she had a lot of clients, and she said, of all my clients who live outside of LA, you're the only one who flies into LA to take meetings. And so that's also expensive, right? It's time consuming. And, but that was what I was willing to do.
And did you share any drafts with your brother?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Steve would read my screenplays, and he read Chasey 3000. Absolutely. Yeah.
He was in Utah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And he, absolutely. I mean, Steve was. Sorry.
That's okay. We can take a minute if you want.
Because I lost my brother recently. Steve died about 18 months ago.
Sorry.
And I often say, he was my greatest ally. And one of the things I learned in making the movie is when things went bad, when things went wrong, everyone runs for cover. And as the filmmaker, you're sort of left by yourself. And Steve was the only one who didn't run.
Yeah, and you see that in the relationship in the movie. And again, I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah,
but
it's real.
interesting.
I often say, sometimes in life, we just, you're just in the foxhole, being bombarded, crying for your mother, and that's all you can do. But some people run, and Steve stayed in the foxhole with me, and toughed out those really difficult times to get this movie finished.
If you were interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Now back to the interview.
Making the movie was, exhilarating, and it was also the most stressful thing I've probably ever encountered. I've said it before. I've said, when people ask me what it's like to make an independent movie, I say, oh, okay, so what you do is you take the most critical deadline you've ever faced, take the most dire financial crisis you've ever faced, add those two together, and multiply by 10. That's what it's like to make an independent Hollywood movie. It is very difficult. And I just saw a podcast with Paul Thomas Anderson. He said, and I've been quoting him, he said, it's a miracle any movie gets made. That's how difficult it is. When a big time director and filmmaker says that, people don't realize all the elements that have to come together, to make this film.
And do you think if it hadn't have been such a special story to you, you would have given, if it had just been some just horror story that maybe you were invested in, liked it, or a coming of age drama about another family, but because there was a personal connection to it, you kept driving it through?
That's a really, really good question. I've never thought of it. I don't know. I just know that I faced, I went into this, and another thing I learned about filmmakers is that, maybe I said it somewhat flippantly, but I said I was not going to risk my family, my finances, or my faith to make this movie. And in the end, I risked all three of them. I risked everything. And I've learned every filmmaker who is making a film, especially for the first time, sometimes not even for the first time, and it might be for a special project. But I was facing, personal ruin, financial ruin if I didn't get this movie made, and so it was an incredible experience. But it's not unique. It's just a tough tough world out there.
That is
Right?
very true. I'm curious, and I don't want to push things beyond a limit you don't want to go, but you said you pushed against your faith, and so it jeopardized that as well.
Yeah, it just,
So
I want
whatever
to
you
say
want to
that.
talk about.
Yeah, it just pushing everything I pushed everything sort of to the limit of you know, my, you know, what am I going to do to make this movie? You know, or what am I capable of doing or not doing? And so, you know, you have to ask yourself some difficult questions, but it worked out, but it was pretty dicey for a while, you know, and you know, it happens. People, you know, the movie gets delayed. We had, you know, the 2008 happened with the crash of the market, and you have some investors who get unhappy, and then all of a sudden you get blamed for a lot of things that you have no control over, right? And it can, but it's not unique. It's not unique to me, or it's not unique to filmmakers. I think it's anyone who starts a business, anyone who is an entrepreneur. You know, I got sued 3 times,
Oh my, okay.
and I, you know, I would tell this story to other people in Hollywood that I know, and they would laugh at me. You got sued, you know, welcome to the club, Bill.
Sorry.
But and it didn't necessarily.
It was a hazing, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, wow. You know, it's a whole other story. I think it made me a better attorney. Once I got sued, I learned. I love the law profession. I have a daughter who's a judge. But I tell people, I took this fascinating journey in making this film. And I met agents and producers and actors and union people and financiers, studio people. The worst people I met on this journey, by far, no one is even close. Attorneys. The worst profession, and they knew I was an attorney. And I'd say, that's your answer to me. And you know that I'm an attorney, and that's your answer. That's how you're treating me. We have a real problem, the legal profession has a problem. And it wasn't until I was a client that I learned that.
What was the idea that got you excited about this story?
Well, the two would be, one is my relationship with my brother was very unique. And I always felt that it was, and that it was a story that I thought needed to be told. Okay, but then we also had this love of Roberto Clemente, this ball player who was just bigger than life, and he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and we were Pittsburgh Pirate fans, and my father would take us to the games, and we would, as we got older, as teenagers, we'd go to the games ourselves. But the Roberto Clemente story dovetails really nicely with the story of the brothers, and you know, he because his life ends so tragically, you know, it adds this emotional element to the story. But he was and is the most influential player probably in baseball, because he is, for the Latin players, the most important and the greatest player for them, and coming out of Latin America. And he was not only, and he was a great player, and he had 3,000 hits. He won 2 World Series, and he was also a humanitarian. But he was he was a great man. I always say, whatever profession he was going to choose, whether it was going to be a teacher or a doctor or whatever he would do, Roberto Clemente would have been great because he just seemed to have this innate greatness about him.
And I don't know too much about him, but if I understand correctly, that his greatness is unfortunately what caused his demise in the end.
Well, yeah, in that he was going to fly to Nicaragua after the earthquake, and what happened was money, supplies, food were being sent to Nicaragua, but some of the corrupt officials there were not getting it to the people. And he had actually gone to Nicaragua to teach like a baseball camp, and he had this connection with the Nicaraguan people. And he said, "Oh, I will go. They won't do that to me. I will make sure that the people get these supplies." And so on New Year's Eve, 1972, they took off from San Juan, Puerto Rico in a plane which was mechanically compromised and overloaded, and it crashed on takeoff into the ocean.
And he was never found?
He was never found. His body was never found. A great quote was a sister, a Catholic nun said, so that his spirit could be spread within the ocean. It would go. His spirit could go more places. Kind of a beautiful thought. But yeah, so he was a very beloved player and admired, and my brother and I, Steve and I, had this love of Clemente.
Bill, how badly did your brother want you to make this film?
Maybe at first, I'm not sure I mean, he wanted me to make the film and to be successful, but as time went on and as we experienced setbacks and trials, and I reached out to him personally on each and every one of them, and he was my ally as he was throughout my life. He very much wanted to make this movie. He was fearless. That's one of the things that was so interesting about my brother and me is that I was physically stronger than my brother, but he was emotionally stronger than me. Maybe that's a little bit a part of the story. I tried to make it a part of the story, if you think about it. And but when you're disabled, we had a problem with one guy. I forget who it was right now, and everybody was afraid to approach this guy on this money issue. And so I called my brother Steve, and I told him, that everybody's afraid of this guy. And he said, "I'll talk to him." He said, "Bill, I can't move my arms and legs. What could this guy possibly do to me?" It's a pretty interesting perspective. But that's how tough my brother was. He was fearless. He didn't care about what this guy thought or did. And but he was with me every step of the way. The interesting thing about our movie is that we have an incredible cast. We had an incredible cast. And once we got Ray Liotta, a lot of people wanted to be in a Ray Liotta film, even though they didn't have a scene with him. And so we had this incredible cast. We had Lauren Hawley and Emmett Walsh, and Seymour Cassell plays our grandfather, and just this incredible cast. One of the highlights, again, of my life was the night that Ray Liotta flew into Pittsburgh. Our producer, Ryan Johnson, pulled me aside and just warned me. He said, "Bill, with A-list actors, there's going to be one of three things he's going to do. He's either A, going to come in, he's not going to talk to anybody, he's just going to go to his room. Two, or B, he'll come in with major changes and you're going to be up all night rewriting his scenes. Or three, he'll come in with notes." Well, he came in with notes.
Oh, great.
And I sat down, just the two of us, and we talked about the movie and how it resonated with him. Cool. And he shared with me that he was adopted and that he grew up somewhat like Mickey with a chip on his shoulder, and the story resonated with him. And then he told me how I could make one of the scenes a little better toward the end, and not have so many peaks and valleys of emotion in one scene. And I've taken that into my writing since then, that I didn't realize that I was creating this, roller coaster of emotions in one scene for the actor. And it was a great experience. And then equally was another late addition was Jay Carnes, who plays my brother as an adult. And Jay was a veteran, a TV actor. He had actually knew Ray. They got along very well. And Jay was a very late addition to the cast. And so when he came in, our director Greg Lannacy, gave him a tape of my brother that Steve was somewhere speaking. And then he called my brother the night before filming. And he talked to him for like 45 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And that's where he got his cadence and his pattern of his speech from my brother. And he was that good of an actor that within less than 24 hours, he adapted his performance to my brother's physical cadence of his speech, the way he held his head or moved his eyes to express himself. And people who know us well, I've more than one person said this at the end of the movie on the bridge there, that those two brothers, they were like us, and the way they react.
And when Ray had these notes, when Ray Liotta came in and had these notes, how surreal was this?
It was incredible to be sitting there, And again, if I told anyone that story, they wouldn't even believe me, right? It was incredible, and he's an intense guy, really intense guy, but yet he was very accessible and wanted to be in this movie. Because he said he wanted to make a movie that his daughter could go see.
That's great.
Yeah, and the fact that he was in Field of Dreams, and that he narrated Goodfellas. That being part of our movie was just an incredible get.
And that intensity is why so many people love him in these roles. He has this intensity, or he had this intensity, I should say.
Yeah.
But there was an earnestness in his eyes, that you would see.
Yeah. There was even the opening scene with he and Keith David.
Right. Yeah.
And I incorporated that scene. Actually happened to my friend. That was a true life story, but it didn't happen to me. It happened to my friend, and I incorporated it into the movie. And I think that's why it also resonates with people. That with my friend and this cop had this discussion.
Right. Yeah, that's a great scene too.
Yeah. And so again, Keith David, another great actor, another great voice actor.
Yeah, excellent.
As far as being for actors, who are voice actors as well. He has an incredible career.
When you were writing Chasing 3000 or the incarnation before, what did you want the audience to feel?
I guess I wanted them to feel the importance of being brothers. That, I've always seen it as a somewhat almost sacred relationship. It's interesting. Brothers have been good, have been had for bad and evil, and but also for good, in just scores of stories, right? I love the story. You know, when JFK faced the Cuban crisis, the only person he could trust, the only person who in that room who did not have an agenda was Bobby. And there's that great picture, I don't know if you've ever seen it, of the two brothers standing outside of the Oval Office. Just the two of them talking. He was the only one. I can relate to that. That's the relationship I had with my brother. And it's just, you know, it's important. Sometimes I'm sad when I hear that someone doesn't have a good relationship with their own brother, because I had this great relationship with my brother. And there's something about brothers. I mean, look at the Bible. How many stories there are about brothers? You know, most of them not very good.
Sure.
But then I bring up the fact that when Jesus called his first apostles, he called his first apostles, two pairs of brothers. Why would he do that? He calls two pairs of brothers. It's kind of interesting.
Interesting.
And,
yeah.
you know, I don't know why, but it might be, one reason might be because brothers are willing to die for each other. You know, the whole idea, and that brothers, like boys, young men who are in combat, bond as brothers. You know, the Band of Brothers, right? The series.
Right.
They loved each other. It was stronger than just friendship. They were brothers, and so I did have this strong relationship with my brother, and I wanted people to feel that. It's a very long-winded answer.
And not everybody has that. Not everybody comes from a situation like that where you can feel there's a competition, or everybody has their little rank in their family. Some are the golden child, and some are the scapegoat, and it's hard to change those roles.
Yeah, it is.
You know, you can't really do that.
And it's not. I'm not blaming anyone. It's not your fault if sometimes you don't get along with your own brother. He may not be someone that you can get along with, but I was, you know, lucky, blessed enough to have that relationship. But I do believe, as parents now that I've raised a family, you know, you can teach your children to get along. Okay, that little fatherly advice.
Sure.
But you can teach you know, I think you have to teach your children to get along with each other, and to you know, that's important. Sisters are the same way, right? There's sisterhood, very close. Sisters can be very, very close, and it's that same thing. And so I think, you know, I sharing that with people.
Right. And then you wanted humor in the film. Was it always funny?
Yeah, I mean, we grew up. You know, my brother Steve grew up laughing and joking. You know, it's fun. You know how it's interesting how painful certain stand-up comics' lives are, right? And I think it was Robert McKee who pointed out. He says there have been. You know, I can't tell you how many dinner parties in Hollywood have been ruined by someone inviting a comedy writer to the dinner, thinking that he was going to be a bundle of joy, and he was the most depressed person that you've ever met in your life. But that's what, you know, right? Humor comes from. You either cry about it or you laugh about it. My brother Steve was, and in our family we were able to laugh about things, and he was able to do that. And that was part of who he was he would take the tension out of it. You know, the scene in the movie where, you know, the biker asks him and he goes, I wanted to be a stand-up comic, but life dealt me a cruel blow.
Sure.
I mean, it's pretty funny, right? That's humor, is that you turn it, right? You turn it. What's the expression that humor is just anger turned inside out?
Sure.
And
sarcasm is that way too. Yeah.
Right. And but Steve could be sarcastic and cutting, and but Steve was a funny person,
Well, the grandfather was funny too. There were many funny moments. I don't want to ruin it, but that had me laughing. So there was a good humor that, and you didn't always expect that it was coming. So
Right.
it was, enjoy it.
Yeah, so the grandfather character is actually a composite character, because I did have a father in my life, but in order to make the story more believable, that couldn't be present in this bigger story. Sure. So the grandfather character is really my father and my two grandfathers.
Oh, nice. Okay.
That's there's certain elements of all three of them, and and both of my grandfathers were immigrants, and like most of us, they came to Pittsburgh to work in steel mills, and so I use that line. Writers like to quote themselves, but that we all had two things in common. Our grandfather spoke with accents, and we loved Roberto Clemente, because growing up, everybody's grandfather was an immigrant, whether you were Italian or Greek or Polish, or right, and it didn't matter the nationality, but their grandfathers, everyone's grandfather spoke with accents, right? Because they all came kind of at the same time.
Sure.
To work in the steel mills, but.
When did you start believing that your writing could actually be turned into a movie?
Well, I don't know if I've ever. I guess from the first time I started writing, I had that belief that what I was writing could be a movie. I think most writers, carry that with them, and as the kind of the force behind wanting to get this movie made, is that I think my script is good enough to be a movie. Even my first screenplay, I believed in it enough that I almost sold it, and so I think that has to be part of your constitution as a writer, that you believe that what you're going to write, however, the next 3 to 4 months, 5 months of your life that you're writing this, then it's going to be worth making it as a film.
Right. And so here you're writing in the basement, so to speak, or maybe truly, and you're working at this firm. Most of the people there maybe at the beginning didn't know, and you're taking meetings, and it's fascinating. So just like you said earlier, I think it was the Robert McKee quote about, writers kind of see things in two ways.
Right.
What's really happening to them, and then split off. How is this a part of a story?
Correct.
It was almost as if you were living that in some sense. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Maybe I've never thought of it that way, but in a way, yeah, my life was somewhat schizophrenic, right?
Right, yeah, but in a good way.
Yeah.
So I mean, schizophrenic in a good way. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Well, yeah. Don't ask my wife. Certain days she might have wanted me to committed, but it was. I don't know how many other people have done it, but certainly, like I said, I had a lot of people tell me you cannot do what you think you're doing. You cannot be writing. And I was too old. I was 30 already. I had people tell
30.
me I was too old. That you started too old. I had people sitting across the desk from me. And, but I mean, how do you that's like how do you address that? How do you make that better? How am I going to change that? Right? I mean, is that criticism is just it's just an insult. It's just a criticism. It's not like saying you've got to spend more time on your main character. I mean, if somebody just says you're too old, that's right? But you get those kinds of things in life and I got to a point, and maybe because I was older, and I did have maybe a limited time, but I had people. I got less patient with people, and when I would talk to a producer who read my script and he gave me this answer, I would just say, what does that mean? I don't even know what you mean by that. I would get confronted. One guy said, you can't talk to people like that in Hollywood. I said, well, I am. You know? And basically, and I also learned that a lot of producers needed me more than I needed them. I learned how to discern in a very short period of time whether the person I was sitting across the desk from could help me.
How so? Just a gut.
Just gut feeling. What were their credits? How did they address it? They would tell me. They would start telling me how great they were. All right, but I don't know how many movies he's really actually made. You know, this is way before IMDb, right? Where you could look on your phone while it's talking.
Sure, right.
And so Hollywood is filled with that's a great. It's one of my favorite movies now. It has
The Player? Or
no Argo.
Oh yes,
So you
love
want to
that.
come to Hollywood, right?
Love that movie.
Act like a big shot, right? And not make a movie, right? Well, you'll fit right in. Sure. There are a lot of people like that. Right. And then I always say the Bill Mikita scene. What's fascinating is our foreign distributor was in the same office as that they shot, and where he says something, and the producer goes, "Who are you?" I call that the Bill Mikita scene. I would get that. Who are you again? But you just you have to believe in what you're doing, and you can't let people stand in your way. I got to a point where either you're going to help me, or you're going to get out of my way.
Okay.
I actually said I said that to another producer. Listen, okay, and they would give me the they wanted to give me what do I call the reality talk.
Oh.
And I said, whoa, wait a minute. If you're giving me this like look at my at my life and this I'm way past that. I blew past that stop sign a long time ago. So save your wind. This whole thing that I can't do it. I that's way in my rearview mirror. So either you're going to help me or you're not. But don't give me this spiel that that all these these stumbling blocks in my life that I can't be a writer.
Well, what's fascinating is you said that Ray Liotta said, hey, I have a chip on my shoulder. I was adopted, whatever. And you identified that. You said you have a slight chip. How does that help people in life? And how can it hurt someone?
Well, I guess you can be too angry, but I guess I always had a certain amount of anger. I remember my brother Steve, again, only Steve could defend me in this way. But a journalist was writing a story about me and called Steve and said, was your brother angry growing up? And my brother's answer was, well, wouldn't you be if your brother couldn't walk? And and so, we all have different, emotional makeup. You can't be too angry. That way you're going to alienate people constantly. And so I wouldn't be confrontive with someone until they were obviously not going to help me. And then I would say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to do this, whether you think I can or not.
Right, and there's Michael Crichton, John Grisham, David Balducci. I believe they were attorneys that
Michael Crichton was actually, I think, a doctor.
Oh, doctor. Okay,
MD.
sorry.
But
okay.
So you can do it. But it's interesting. As a novelist, it's a little different. You can write as a novel, but being a screenwriter, and then meet people knowing that at that time, because after that though, I covered it by having my LA cell phone, so that I thought it was in LA, so I didn't have to deal with that anymore. I didn't have to explain that to people. But you would get, you would just get people who would see the fact that at my age, I didn't live in LA, and there's no way you can do this. And to be quite candid, I guess the odds were against me.
Even 30? 30 was too old?
Well, that's what I was being told. I didn't believe it, but I was being told. Yeah, that I started too late. That nope, you can't do it. And writers started a lot younger. Well, I didn't. So,
What was it like to get people to read your screenplay in those early days?
oh, it was great. Even, I mean, the fact that someone would take time to read my screenplay, and because many times you just couldn't get anyone to read it, right? To get someone and to get feedback, that was very important to me, and Donnie Nelson, who I mentioned, was my writing consultant. She would say, Bill, as a writer, and in this town, you want to fail upward. So every screenplay that wasn't sold by me still helped me in the next screenplay. I think all writers have to know that. That's why you keep writing, is because even your failed attempts are going to make you a better writer, and that's that stair-step approach that you're learning something every time you write. And so for me, it was really important for someone, a Hollywood producer, to read my screenplay.
As someone who wasn't in LA living, you were just flying in, how did you get someone to read your screenplays?
That's a good question, because there was I've got a couple answers to that. One was it was at the time there was a book. There was you could buy a book with every producers in Hollywood and their phone numbers.
Oh, wow.
And addresses. So I learned how to write a pretty good letter pitching my story. But what I learned in Hollywood is that producers and people in Hollywood work pretty hard and they work late. And so I would call the office, producer's office, very late in the day. And guess what? Sometimes the producer would pick up. No one else was there. Or very early in the morning. And so that I found out that they would be the first in and the last out. And so I would call and I would pitch my story. And if it was something they liked, then I would send it, literally snail mail at the time. You just put your script in a folder, in a big envelope with a letter of introduction, and you'd send it to them. Then I was able to. I found that there was this interesting connection. There were a lot of people in Hollywood with the Cincinnati connection. And I tell people that you'd be surprised whose brother works somewhere, or whose cousin or brother-in-law. And I started to peck my way through, and that would be my introduction. I understand you were born in Cincinnati. Well, yeah, and that would open a door. I honestly, there was at least a dozen producers that I was able to get meetings with, or to have some sort of relationship with, just based on that alone. So I tell people, if you don't live in Cincinnati, if you don't live in LA, wherever you live, I know there's people who have friends and relatives who are in the movie industry. And there was a woman named Eva Peel, and she was friends with Donnie Nelson. Eva Peel had, her niche in the movie industry was that she would put together this one night she would get together, it could be as many as 18 to 20 producers and maybe 40 to 60 different writers. And we would pay for that night. And my friend called it speed dating for writers, because we would sit down, and and everybody would have like 5 minutes to pitch your story. So we'd pitch your story, and sometimes they were interested, sometimes they weren't. They'd say, well, send me the screenplay. Then after your 5 minutes were up, you'd go and sit with another producer. And we were in this big room. And so I got to know a lot, because I did that, I got to know a lot of producers. In fact, I would see Ryan. Ryan would come to these, Ryan Johnson, and I would make contact with him like every quarter. You know, I would come out and that one night I would have, sometimes I would talk to 10 producers, and I would be able to send 5 or 6 screenplays. I said there were writers who would work 6 months and not have that kind of productive night. And because of Eva Peel and her, I don't even remember what it was called now. There was a name for it, but that was her niche in the entertainment world. She would match up producers, independent producers looking for stories, and unproduced writers looking to get their stories made. And that's where I met a lot of people, and made contacts, and actually made friendships.
Do you think it's harder now or easier now? You said there was this big book of producers with their phone number, and then you have these
Yeah, I think
meet and greets?
I think it's easier because of M. Night Shyamalan, and so many other filmmakers are now outside of Hollywood, and because of Zoom calls and other things. I think it's easier now, and it's more accepted. So some of my advice might be somewhat backward, but because I think writers today might be able to take advantage. And with emails, right, you can email and have a contact and be able to get your script to someone that same day, as opposed to me sending a script 3 days later. And so I think in my opinion, it would be easier today to make contact because of those things, because of technology, really.
Sure, but it doesn't mean you'll open the email. I mean, you might not even see it until months later. So
Right.
when the U.S. Postal Service brings you a package, you go, oh, what's this?
Right.
It's
Well,
a little different, yeah.
That's a good point. So I don't, because almost everyone I talk to now, I know, or I've met, or I have a reason to communicate with them. I'm not cold calling on someone,
And most people don't pick up their phones today.
right.
So in some ways, that's what I was just wondering, because we're so inundated and things are so accessible and we're so overloaded. Is it almost, maybe that way was working at that time?
And it was, because everyone had an office phone. That was right on the cusp of cell phones, but you could get a producer in his or her office, because that's where they were to take the phone calls.
You say as a screenwriter, you learned to pitch in 2 sentences. How did you pitch Chasing 3000? What was your 2-sentence pitch?
This is a story set in 1972 about 2 brothers who take off across country in a race against time to see their hero, Roberto Clemente, get his 3,000th hit. And along the way, the brothers learn the importance of being brothers.
Okay. Did anyone ever tell you to shorten that? It's great, I love it, but
No, well, one producer, when I pitched one producer at a studio, it was Warner Brothers. He said, "Oh, so it's Rain Man with a baseball theme."
Okay.
Kinda. I never thought
guess,
of it.
yeah.
I guess, right? I never
Yeah.
thought of it that way. But it's
Right.
the elements are there,
Sure.
right? The one brother's disabled. It's kind of I guess he's right.
Okay.
Right, but I don't know if I ever pitched it as like Aliens, Jaws in space, right? Those some of those classic pitches of 2 or 3 lines or words to pitch their screenplay, but yeah.
Why was this story worth fighting for?
I think it's because as I said, it's important. It's a unique story. I can say without hesitation, my relationship with my brother was unique, and I don't know if you could find two other brothers like us. And because of that, growing up, and I felt we were interesting, and that let me tell you this, our story is so unique that a woman contacted me on Facebook, and she sent me a friend request, and she watched the movie with her husband, and she turned to her husband after the movie and she said, "I think these two boys lived across the street from my grandfather." And we did. She was only 6 years old, and she remembered us.
That's awesome.
That's I think that's pretty strong testimony.
Yeah.
That how unique we were. That a 6-year-old girl who's now an adult, that 50 years later,
Wow.
she said, "I think these boys lived across the street from my grandfather." And we did. That's how unique our story was, and that she remembers these two brothers, one in a wheelchair, the other boys. We were playing baseball in the neighborhood with other boys.
That's powerful.
Yeah. And I guess I haven't spoken enough about how important my brother was, how unique, and his life story, what he had to overcome. That is, he's just a remarkable person. And so the story is told from my perspective, right? From the perspective of the older brother. But really, I think when you're watching it, you see how remarkable, this young man's life is, this boy's life, in a wheelchair, having to overcome muscular dystrophy, and Steve was a remarkable person with remarkable talent, and so that's that would be my answer.
Do you have any crazy Hollywood pitching stories, not mentioning any names or companies, but maybe scenarios that you can tell us that might be good for any filmmakers who are pitching currently or will be?
Well, I don't know if mine are any crazier than anyone else's. I mean, it's a crazy life, right? I mean, the life of a screenwriter is just in and of itself is a crazy life. But I guess I'm not sure I have any really unique story other than stories that I wouldn't let anyone discourage me. And I guess I would say that to any writer or filmmaker, no matter what your age, especially if you're young and you're starting out, do not allow anyone to discourage you. Whether you say it out loud or you say it in your head, just tell them you're either going to help me or you're going to get out of my way. And so I did, and I think the other thing is, I don't know if it's, again, I'm not sure it's unique, but listen, if you're a screenwriter, listen to the criticism that people have about your script. Because many times people tell you they love your script and they don't do anything with it. And I found that I forged stronger relationships with people who had criticisms of my writing or the story, because I believe they were seeing what was wrong with my story and how I could make it better. And so try not to get defensive, or I would not, and I tried not to defend my story. I would just listen to the criticism. And I think it's important because it's interesting. We interviewed Ryan and I had to interview 6, 7, or 8 directors, and all of them loved the story and told me how great it was. And Greg came in; he was the last one we interviewed, and he told me what he didn't like about the story. And he told me what he thought how the story could be better. And the fact that he did that led me to believe that he was the one to direct. He was also a very good writer. I learned a lot from Greg writing, a lot. And so do not get discouraged, but also don't be put off by the criticism.
So if someone is praising it too much, or hey, love it, but I can't really do anything with it, but I love it, then they're blowing smoke?
Well, that's that's another good question. Yeah, in Hollywood, many times it is. It's just, because I would confuse me. Well, if you love my story, then why can't we do something with it? And sometimes people will love it, but they'll say, I don't do these kinds of stories, right? And sometimes there's a legitimate reason for this, or they'll say that the story's just not for them, but it's well written. But I found that someone who gave me an honest critique of the story, that I found that much more helpful in going back, to doing a rewrite.
And from watching Argo, what similarities can you apply to what you went through with Chasing 3000?
Oh well, just my experience in Hollywood. How Hollywood is filled with people who love the dance. They love the dance of sitting down, taking a meeting. Let's talk about your script. I think you're a great screenwriter, and there's no commitment. They will not commit to, and that's very frustrating. They will not commit to your project. And I've also learned that a lot of independent producers, and this goes for any screenwriter, that they need you more than you need them.
And you said you can tell that
I can
within an instant.
I have this now innate ability, something about their mannerisms, something about their verbiage, something about how, what they're saying to me, whether they can really get this movie made. I can tell it within minutes of meeting someone, whether they're for real or not.
You had said previously that when someone is pitching themselves too much to you, and I'm this and I'm that's also a red flag? Yeah,
because they're telling me how, what they're doing, but first of all, I don't know if you have a lot of movies in production now, and what can you do for me? So, you have to be wise enough, and that just comes with experience. Okay, and I am not the first screenwriter to ever get burned, and there's a lot of stories out there. It's just a tough profession, and you just have to learn to. It's really important to gravitate toward people you like, and who like you. You might say, "Oh, that's Bill. That's so simplistic," but it's truth. I think it's part of life. Is to stay in contact with people you like.
Sure. Well, also, you're living a different existence in Ohio than LA, I would imagine. Forgive me, I've only been in Ohio a few times, but it's going to be probably a different interaction with people. LA there's all kinds of reactions.
Yeah.
Some super friendly, but then you're like, are they trying to sell me something? What's going on here?
Yeah. Well,
some not so friendly.
Yeah, and it's just again, it's a different world that I've become familiar with, become part of, and so I know, certain people that you might want to stay away from.
Did anyone ever jokingly say, "Bill, you're becoming too Hollywood"?
No.
Okay, that's good.
No, I was gonna be like for this interview. I was gonna dye my hair white like Billy Idol.
Oh, nice. Okay,
I
right,
just thought
right.
I'd really go Hollywood and
Couple necklaces.
yeah, just you really go. Yeah, I've often joked about that, but no, it's interesting. Success has come really pretty late in life for me, and so had success come much earlier, maybe it would have an impact. I don't know, but I just know that I was grounded a lot differently because I was older, and so I think in many ways it helped me through some of those experiences.
How did you raise the initial 700,000 for chasing 3,000?
Well, this is where the cycle of living outside of Hollywood actually helped me. The people that I was dealing with trying to get the movie made lived here in Hollywood and were struggling writers and producers. And in their sphere of influence, they didn't meet people with money, if I can say it that way. Whereas living in Cincinnati, I knew people who had money, and I knew of people who had money. And I would go to my health club, I'd go to work out, and I knew someone was a multimillionaire, and I would literally walk up to them and introduce myself. And I would say, I know I'm being really forward, but I have a movie, believe it or not, I'm a screenwriter, and I'd like to get it made. Would you have any interest in investing in a movie? There are people, and nobody was offended. They would just say, no, I'm not, or some people were interested. And I would start a conversation. But what I did is I ended up going to people who I had friends, I had friendships with. And the money came from a friend. His name was Mark Motley, and he owned had a wealth management company, and so he had at his fingertips all of the investors and people who he knew might be interested in investing in a film, and how much they would want to put in and how much they could put in. And so that's the way it worked. Once he read the script and liked it, and once his partners okayed it, and then we met with Ryan Johnson, so it was Mark and Ryan and myself, and that's how the money got to. That's how we got the money to get the movie made. And so, for any film independent filmmaker, that is the biggest hurdle is finding the money. You have the passion, you have the story, you have the vision, and you have to get the money, and then you have to budget that money correctly. And it's not easy. That you have to learn to do that. But I would say, and people do it all sorts of ways now, right? They have GoFundMe and things like that. But and even big time, I think Spike Lee used GoFundMe for one of his projects. So there's a number of different ways that you can do it, but the best way you can do it is to find people who are investors who, I use the word appetite, have a willingness, let's call it a willingness to make a somewhat risky investment, because investing in movies is somewhat risky. But you certainly are not going to find those people, in a small sphere, in Hollywood, where everyone's a struggling writer and a struggling producer, struggling actor. You may have to step outside of that, okay, and look at a wider scope.
And so a majority of the investors or all the investors actually were not in California?
Oh, they were all from Cincinnati.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And a few others from throughout Ohio or Pittsburgh. One might have been in Utah or Idaho. But yeah, they were. The money came from outside of Hollywood. And again, it's not unique. The Coen brothers made Fargo. It was a group of dentists who invested in Fargo. I don't know if you knew that. And they became multimillionaires on it. But it was literally a group of dentists who decided that they were going to invest in this film from Minnesota, from Minneapolis, where the Coen brothers were from. And so it's not unique, but even they at that point they already had a number of movies and films. They had to go look for their money, and it's not easy. It's not. But you'd be surprised who might invest in your movie if you ask.
What lesson in raising money for movies can you pass on to our viewers?
You have to, what's the word I'm looking for? You have to ask for the money. Okay, there's an old expression in sales. The worst they can say is no. Okay, so if you're selling a product, if you're a salesman in salesman jargon, the worst a person across the desk can say is no, they're not interested. But you have to ask for money, and you have to try to find investors and understand that if you have friends and family and others who are investing, it's a tough world in them recouping their investment 100%, because again, it's a tough world to make an independent movie. But you ask for the money. You look for someone who has money, and I would certainly try that instead of trying to put together, a few $100s here or a few $100s there, is to try to find someone who's going to invest in it.
But not everybody has access to people that have money, or run in those circles or work in those circles. So I guess crowdfunding is definitely a good option for those.
Sure, there's all sorts of those platforms today that weren't available when I made Chasing 3000. So yeah, and you should look at all of those options.
Bill, what was it like getting Ray Liotta attached? How many days before production?
4 days.
4 days. So you didn't know who was going to be one of the big names in the film.
Correct.
Up to 4 days. So then once that happens, are you going back to investors?
Right. We went back to our main investor, who then put together a package. There's sort of an A and a B. Investors who come in on the A platform, and then some who come on the B platform who might be recouping their money second. But with Ray Liotta, we had a much stronger. And we also were able, with that, to get a commitment from a distributor.
Once Ray Liotta
Right.
jumped on? Okay.
Very early on. And so with that, then the investors felt more comfortable with spending more money, and knowing that if they get a theatrical release, that there's a greater potential to be profitable. And so, with a big name actor, you have that cachet, I guess, to go back to your investors, or at least we did. We had that door was opened to us with conversations. Now that we have Ray Liotta, we have a theatrical release. We have a commitment in writing from a distributor. I think we're going to need more money. We're going to need more money to finish this movie, and so we were able to raise that money.
And so you already had cast and crew lined up to go to Pennsylvania?
Yeah, we were already there.
You're already there, okay.
I mean, when we shot the movie with Ray Liotta, with Ray Liotta's contract, with him shooting, we shot a large part of that 700,000 in that 4-day shoot. So at that point, we had 4 days in the can with Ray Liotta, but we had to come back here to LA, right, to shoot the rest of the movie. And we were able to do that, but that was not easy. That was once we got that commitment. After that, then we did get a commitment from a distributor, and then we were able to start to put the rest of the money together.
And this was for just U.S. territory, or
Correct.
Oh, no foreign sales?
Yeah, not at that point.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And you said there were A investors and B investors. So is that the first money in, first money out type
Yes,
thing?
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then who?
Although there were, we had a lot of investors. I wouldn't do it that way this time. We had almost too many investors. As far as it's better to try to get money from one or two sources. I learned from just trial and error. You're because you're dealing with then not only with the money, but you're dealing with all the different investors, and so it's not that's easier said than done. You may have to cobble your budget together, but
Also, the more people involved in something, the more chance for conflict.
yes,
Unfortunately, it doesn't matter whether it's money or free, but yeah.
correct. That's just life.
Yeah, that's just life. Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
But it's I think the key is to realize that there are people out there who invest in film. You just have to find them.
Sure. And they wanted to be part of the process.
Right.
They wanted to come to set.
Right.
And you had a premiere?
Yes.
They wanted to go to the premiere and
Yeah, we had a couple premieres. We had one in one in LA, and we had one in Cincinnati, and we had one in Pittsburgh.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
What's the greatest baseball movie that is yet to be made?
That would be Brewer's Boys. So what happened is when Chasing 3000 came out, it was about the same time that Facebook came on the scene. And people would reach out to my brother or me, hey, are you the Steve Mikita or Bill Mikita for this movie? One morning, I woke up and someone had sent me a note, a message saying, hey, I saw your movie last night. I really loved it. And I said, thank you, send me a friend request. And he did, and then he said, I have a great idea for a movie. As you know, some people do, some people don't. Mostly, it doesn't work out that way. But he sent me his phone number, so I called him, and he said, I played on the great. I have another idea for a baseball movie. I said, he said, I played on the greatest high school baseball team of all time. Really? Yeah.
That's what they all say. Yeah.
He said we played. We won the L.A. Municipal League in 1965 during the Watts riots. I said, the city's burning around you, yeah, and you played a baseball game, yeah. I'm in already.
Wow, interesting. Okay.
And I just was interested. I said, so just out of curiosity, who was on your team? And he said, well, there was Bob Watson, Bobby Tolan, Enos Gabel, Doc Ellis. I said, whoa, time out. You're telling me all these future major leaguers were on your team? Yeah. And Dennis Gilbert. Dennis Gilbert, you mean the Dennis Gilbert who just tried to buy the Los Angeles Dodgers, Dennis Gilbert? Yeah. Short white guy. Yeah, so you were an integrated team. Yeah. And we had this really inspirational coach. His name was Chet Brewer. And he kept us out of trouble, and he was a mentor to all of us. and he was a former pitcher in the Negro Leagues. Wow. I said, that's incredible. Oh, and also, by the way, our 9-year-old bat boy was Eddie Murray. I said, you mean the greatest switch hitting first baseman of all time? Yeah. He was your bat boy? Yeah. I mean, I'm blown away. Why haven't I ever heard of your team? So I did my homework. I find out all these guys lived in South Central Los Angeles, and I optioned the story, and the story just kept getting bigger. We met all these former pro ball players, many of them, and it was an incredible story. And they told us how much Chet Brewer meant to them. But as I had one writer friend who said this story keeps writing itself. So they told me one day they came to practice, and this tall, lanky gentleman was teaching Doc Ellis how to throw a curveball. It was Satchel Paige. And then I asked him, did you have a team that you had trouble beating? Yeah. Who was their pitcher? Raleigh Fingers, another Hall of Famer. What? And they said there was this 24-year-old scout from the Dodgers. He was at all of our games. Tommy Lasorda? Yeah, Tommy Lasorda. He was at all your games. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. And then they told me about Chet Brewer, and he was a pitcher in the Negro Leagues. And unfortunately, by that time, he was too old by the time the race barrier was broken by Jackie Robinson. So that time passed him by. He wasn't able to play in the major leagues. But he had this eye for talent and this ability to coach. The Chet Brewer coached 24 future major league ball players. And my theory is, I've told people, this was right before the influx of all the great Latin players. Anyone who was anyone came out of Southern California, right here in LA. It was the nexus of the baseball world. It was incredible. All of these great players came out of Los Angeles. And this team had 9 players, high school players, 9 players. They got 9 major league contracts. If you had 2 boys on one team in your city, it would be national news. If you had 2 players on one team, high school team got major league contracts, it would be national news. 9, all 9 players got major league contracts. And Chet Brewer, he kept, they played this game. They even though the Watch Riots were going on, and not only did Chet Brewer experience racism in its most awful forms, but these young players he somehow guided them through this unscathed by making baseball like this sanctuary for them. And so he was an incredibly inspirational and generous man. I met Tommy Lasorda about 4 years ago, and I introduced myself and I told him about my project. And I got to the point where I said, I'm making a film about Chet Brewer, and he said, I love Chet Brewer. He still remembered Chet and loved, and that's the impact that Chet Brewer had on people. And now that Major League Baseball, I don't know if you know this, they have now recognized all of the records and statistics of the Negro Leagues as major league contracts. And because of that, Chet Brewer now has some major league records.
Oh, wow.
And one of my goals, not only to tell this story, I believe it to be, and this is not hyperbole, I believe this with all my heart, other than the Jackie Robinson story, this is the greatest American baseball story there is. And I would love to get Chet Brewer into the Hall of Fame with the notoriety that this movie would bring him. And he was the greatest baseball guy, the greatest baseball man no one knows about. And and these players who are now in their 70s, they still remain close. It's fascinating. They come together and it's just like it was 50 years ago for them. They laugh and they joke. They have their own nicknames for each other, and they all stayed very close. They were all very successful. And quite a few of them have passed away in the last few years, which is kind of sad. But this story is another story that has to be made. It's a story that has to be told. And so we're looking to get it made.
And this all came from someone seeing Chasing 3000
Correct.
and contacting you, and then you have this Facebook
Correct.
sort of friendship, and so...
Yeah, and then just kind of the symbiotic relationship I have with Chasing 3000, with maybe this, with my own life somehow. The team the team that won, they were known as the Little Pirates. They were associated with the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Oh.
And so there's somehow almost a connection, because one of the players played with Doc Ellis actually played with Roberto Clemente, and so it's almost a prequel to the Clemente story. But it's a great story. It is a baseball story, but it is also a great story of overcoming challenges and overcoming prejudice, and just the kind of man that Chet Brewer was.
And how has writing this screenplay been different than writing Chasing 3000?
I think I'm a better writer. I think I know, after making Chasing 3000, what kind of elements needed to be present in the story to make it a good story, to make it a good baseball story, and to also to make it where it wasn't going to be too expensive. And so, believe it or not, sometimes you have to think of those kinds of issues when you write a screenplay. And I think my experience with Chasing 3000 helped me to become a better writer, and to craft the story in a way that would touch the audience.
I know off camera we just talked briefly about, like, you'll see something, or then it requires a crane shot back in the day, and why would a screenwriter write that shot into the film when it's going to cost so much of the budget? But did you worry about making it big enough? You said last time with Chasing 3000, they said, I like the movie, I like the brother relationship.
This story is big enough because it's centered around the time of the Watts riots. So this incredible upheaval, right? For a 4 or 5 day period in LA is the setting of all things a baseball game and a baseball tournament. So it really gives this a much bigger element to the story.
So you feel that that's big enough, obviously.
Oh yes.
Then when you were told with Chasing 3000,
oh, yes.
you need to make it bigger.
Yeah, because not only that, you have at least 6 or 7 not only major leaguers but Hall of Fame players who were associated with this team, and so or were around this team. And so with that, if I had to pitch it, it would be Remember the Titans with a baseball theme. A true story about players, some African American, some Caucasian, who came together with this incredibly inspirational coach and man during a turbulent time. People think today is turbulent. The 60s and were extremely turbulent. And the violence and amount of death and
Kent State.
yes, and the property damage done during the Watts riots was incredible. And so it just adds, that's the setting to this story. It gives it an emotional lift that most stories wouldn't have.
Sure. How did you go about optioning the story?
I just was able to option it from the Dan Pierce, who pitched me the story, and then we were able to talk to all the other players, the men who were part of this team. They were all behind it. They all want to see the movie made, and so it was. There was not one person who pushed back on it, and largely because it was about Chet Brewer. They didn't see it. They didn't see it as about themselves. They saw it. It was their love of Chet Brewer.
Sure. And what type of research did you do once you said, I want to commit time to this?
Well, I spent a lot of time. I started to interview the players who are now, Dennis Gilbert is one of the most successful baseball agents in baseball, and one of the biggest baseball men in all of baseball. Next time you watch a Dodgers game, right behind the home plate on the first row, there's a good-looking guy with dark hair and sunglasses. That's Dennis Gilbert, and he and Bobby Tolan and Bob Watson and others were very gracious and shared with me then stories that happened to them, and that I was able to incorporate into the screenplay.
Yeah, we have a quote here from Dennis Gilbert, I believe. He said about Chet Brewer, "He could be the most respected person I've ever met in my life. Everybody loved him."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And Dennis Gilbert always tells me everyone called him Mr. Brewer. Everyone in the community. In fact, that was actually my working title, was Mr. Brewer. And so, titles of movies can change, but he was that kind of man. And I've heard stories now from other people. He's almost a Roberto Clemente-like individual. His character, he was such a great man. How he influenced others outside of, baseball. His generosity, his kindness, and he was incredible individual. So the story is just an incredible story based on the number of players that this area of LA generated.
Why is this story worth fighting for?
It would be because, again, it's a story that needs to be told. We live in a very divided time. It's painful to see how divided we are as a nation, and for people to reflect that in 1965, it may have been even more turbulent, but during this time, one man was able to make the difference in 9 young men's lives that changed the course of their life and baseball. That's a pretty dramatic story, even if you're not a baseball fan. So.
Did you do these interviews in person?
Yes.
Oh, you did. You actually
Yes.
met face to face.
Yes. Yeah. And I had a tape recorder and notes, and I just had a Zoom call with Bobby Tolan and Dennis Gilbert recently, and they told me some things that I still didn't know, and I revised. I added it to the story, what Bob Watts' nickname was, and a couple other things. Well, I didn't know. I mentioned Satchel Paige. There's another great. Some people, I don't know if you've ever heard of Josh Gibson. Josh Gibson was maybe the greatest home run hitter of all time, but he played in the Negro Leagues. They actually called him the Black Babe Ruth. And Chet Brewer and others who played call Babe Ruth the white Josh Gibson, which I love. But there was another catcher named Biz Mackey. I think there's a rapper that
Biz Markie?
Yeah, that made a play on that name. But there's a catcher named Biz Mackey, who some consider the greatest defensive catcher in the Negro Leagues. He lived in South Central Los Angeles, and he would come and to practice as well. So there were two Hall of Fame Negro League players who came and were associated with his team. Pretty incredible.
And Ozzie Smith as well?
Yes, they tease Ozzie Smith to this day. Ozzie Smith never made one of Chet Brewer's teams. A Hall of Fame shortstop did not make one of his teams, and they still tease him. And so this team was just incredible. The word is used, maybe overused, but it's truly a remarkable story. And it'll be a great movie.
What are some of the ups and downs you faced currently trying to get this movie made?
Well, like every screenwriter, every filmmaker out there, it has been such a difficult for me, 4 years at least. So we had COVID, then we had the writer's strike, then we had the actor's strike, then I had my brother pass away. I lost 4 years of time, and I think a lot of filmmakers did, simply because Hollywood really put on the brakes. And even right now, there are very few things being made. And it is a difficult world out there. I have another project. I have a third project that I'm pitching as a TV series. And even on the TV side, it's starting to open up a little bit. But it's all of us. There's just everyone I think would agree. It's been a tough last 3 or 4 years. So we have the money to make the movie, but it's been a stop and start thing of getting distribution and getting it because every time we started negotiating, well, first we had COVID, then we were very close 2 years ago, and then the writer's strike hit, and everything went dark for months, for a year after that. And so we're hoping that, everyone is hopeful here in Hollywood that it starts to open up.
Let me see if I understand this. So you have the budget for the film, but you don't have distribution?
Correct. In today's world, you need distribution as well. You need to get a distributor early on to commit to it. And if a studio commits, that would be great, but you need the distributor. And then when we would probably shoot in a state with a big tax rebate, probably in Georgia or Alabama. And a lot of cities in the South, a lot of cities in the Midwest still resemble the 50s and 60s, quite frankly. Whereas South Central Los Angeles looks nothing today like it did in 1965. So where we shoot is going to have to probably be outside of LA. But yes, it wouldn't. You would think, well, why don't you just go shoot the movie and then look for a distributor then, and it's just not. It's just something that the production company is willing to do, and you have to get that distributor up front to be involved, and so that's what we're looking for.
Do you already have the songs, the playlist?
I did. I wrote it with songs.
Okay. You don't have to tell me which ones, but I bet you there's great music
it's
in there.
R&B. It's the '60s R&B songs. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Was that part of the fun for you too? Because I know it seems like music you love to incorporate music.
I love music, and I love to incorporate it.
And it was such a moving force in that time.
It was, and
Not that I was around them, but I mean that there was, music was so pure. It seems like up to a certain point.
and it was, and that industry is completely different, right? Than it was even 10 years ago. So, but that's where we are. We have our budget, we have money, but we're looking for distribution.
And so once you find that, then you'll find the state with the best tax credit.
Correct, and then we can go out to actors. So the way I wrote it, of course, the cast is going to be largely a young cast, young, really African American cast, and so I wrote it that the two main characters would be Chet Brewer and then Dennis Gilbert's father. So two adult. So we'd have two. We need. We'd like to get two A-list actors for those parts, and that would really put us over the top.